Hello, my name is Aviva, and today I wanted to share with you my favorite reads from 2021. So there's only a couple of days left till December is over, and that means that Bookmas is almost over. I've been putting out a video every single day for the month of December, and today I am finally ready to share with you my favorite reads from 2021. Yesterday I did all of my almost favorite reads from 2021, all of the books that just didn't make the cut for, my top tier books of the year. And then the day before that, I did my most disappointing reads from 2021. I've also been putting out a video every single day this month, so if you're not caught up, then I'm going to make sure that my Bookmas playlist is linked in the description below. But today I'm basically going to be sharing with you my top 20 or so books. I have read almost 200 books this year, so I had a really hard time narrowing it down to like a top 10 or so. So I ended up narrowing it down to a top 20. And honestly, a lot of the books aren't like in a specific order. I'm going to share with you just a bunch that were in general my favorite, but I was able to choose a top 5. So at the end of the video, I'm going to go from my 5th most favorite to my number 1 most favorite, but we're leaving that till the end. So let's just get started. First up, I wanted to just share a couple of rereads that I did this year. Honestly, I wish that I did more rereads than I did, but hopefully in 2022, that's something that I'm gonna do more of because I have so many books that I absolutely love that I would love to reread. So, that's a goal for 2022. But this year, I did reread 3 series that I wanted to share with you. The first one is Switch, Torn, and Ascend by Amanda Hocking. So I'm holding up the first book, which is Switched, and this is one of my favorite series of all time. I found this series when I was maybe in middle grade, maybe even before that. This was one of the first fantasy series I ever read. It's basically about this girl who finds out that she's a changeling and she's actually like a princess and a troll and she has magical powers and all that sort of stuff. So she ends up going home to where her birth mother lives and she learns about all of her magic that she has, how to control it, what it means to be a princess. She learns about her history of what a troll is and everything like that. And, she has a couple of romances with a bodyguard, and then there's an enemies to lovers romance with a different prince, and there's a war that's going on. There's a lot of politics. It's basically everything that I love in a series all smacked into one, and I was somehow lucky enough to find it when I was so young because since then I have probably reread this series like literally countless amounts of times. I actually did my reread this year, and I finally realized that I don't think I can reread it again anytime soon, like probably for a couple of years, because I don't think I reread it for 2 years until I did this reread. Like it took me a while to do another reread, whatever. But anyway, my point is that it's going to have to be a little bit longer than that until I pick this book up again because I just know it so well. But I so highly recommend this series. It is so underrated. Like nobody ever talks about it, but I love it. Like The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, like so many people love that series. I just think if you loved that series, you would love this one like 1,000 times more. I also did a reread of Throne of Glass and A Court of Thorns and Roses. So I originally did this because A Court of Silver Flames was coming out, the new release for A Court of Thorns and Roses. So I did an entire reread to prepare myself for that book. And then after I finished reading all of these books, I was having like a book hangover. Like nothing could compare to A Court of Thorns and Roses after you read it. Like everything just feels bland. So all I was able to read was Throne of Glass. So then I did a whole reread of Throne of Glass, and oh my God, some of the best times I had reading this year was when I did this reread. I love these series to death. I'm such a big fan of Sarah J. Maas. I highly recommend these series if you haven't read them yet. They're just filled with everything that I love from, fantasy books in general and romances, like everything. It's just jam-packed with awesomeness. And basically, I will probably be doing another reread of both of these series in 2022. And now for all of the books that I actually found this year and absolutely loved. First up, I'm sharing From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So happens to be, I read this right after I finished my Throne of Glass reread because I was just in that mood and I knew that the new release was coming out, like the 3rd book in this series was coming out. So I'm like, okay, it's finally time. I should just read this series so that I know what everybody's talking about. It's so hyped up. I feel like left out a little bit, and I don't usually like reading series that aren't completed, but I made an exception for this one and I'm very happy I did. I thought that it definitely lived up to the hype. Like if you're a fan of A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you're a fan of Throne of Glass, Sarah J. Maas in general, you like fantasy mixed with a really good romance, then this is seriously the book for you. I don't think it's overhyped. I think that you're getting exactly what you signed up for. You're getting a really interesting fantasy world with politics and wars and secrets and things like that. You're always going to be learning something new. And at the same time, you get a really good romance that is just going to entertain you. So I was a huge fan of this. I liked all 3 books. I binged them all. So in my head, I don't really differentiate what was from which book, but like I kind of remember that book 2 was my favorite because it felt very similar to A Court of Mist and Fury, which is my favorite book from the ACOTAR series. Like just the way that it was laid out and how the romance developed in that time of this storyline. Like I was just a really big fan of the middle one, but in general, all 3 books, I'm like mashing into one and saying that I just am a huge fan of this series, and I'm very excited for March because the new release is coming out, and I will definitely be doing a reread of the first 3 books to prepare myself for the new one. Next, I have The Last Thing You Said by Sarah Byron, which is a YA contemporary romance. It's basically about this girl whose name is Lucy, who had a best friend named Trixie, who had a brother named Ben, and they all 3 were really good friends. They'd hang out all the time together, and Lucy and Ben really liked each other. They were about to get together, make it official to be boyfriend and girlfriend, and then an accident happens and Trixie dies. And then Lucy and Ben, they kind of just like stop talking. They get into somewhat of a fight, and now it's a year later. They haven't talked since Trixie's funeral, and they're both still dealing with their grief and trying to just avoid each other and move on in their own way. And they live in this small lake town, and they both have summer jobs, and basically they both keep running into each other, and they can't seem to stay away from each other. And then, you know, the story is going to go from there. You're going to get to see both of them as, you know, they're dealing with their grief still. They're trying to move on, but they can't seem to stay away from each other. And, you know, it's a dual POV, so you get to see both sides of the story. And it's a really good time. I was very blown away by this book. I kind of picked it up on a whim, mostly because I really liked the cover. I didn't see anybody talking about it at all. And then I looked it up on GOODREADS. It actually had really good reviews. So I kind of just went for it. And I am so happy I did. I mean, it was one of my favorite reads of the year. I was really blown away by it. I had a great time reading it. It was really like a normal read. Like it wasn't too heavy, especially because both of them were dealing with their grief. But like at moments they were both like, you know, a little bit in their head of heaviness of like, okay, what do I do without my best friend or without my sister and stuff like that. So I don't know. I just felt like it had a really good mix of like heaviness as well as like a casual, cute rom-com. So whatever. Anyway, I just really liked this one. Next, I have Not Pretending Anymore by V. Keeland and Penelope Ward. So I'm almost positive that this is the first book that I read by V. Keeland and Penelope Ward, and it's the book that made me want to start like looking up their backlog and starting to read more books by them because I so much enjoyed this book. It's basically a fake dating trope. It's like these 2 people end up becoming roommates. One is a girl and one is a guy. And originally the girl was like, oh, I don't know if I want a roommate with a boy because, you know, girls and boys stuff. And basically the guy was like, don't worry, I have a crush on somebody else. I'm not like interested in you. And she's like, well, that's good because I actually have a crush on somebody else also. So they end up becoming roommates, and then it happens to be their crushes don't really like notice them. So they decide to fake date to try and get their crushes jealous. Then obviously we know where that's going to go. They're all of a sudden going to fall for each other, and they're going to be like, oh, I don't know if I really care about my crushes anymore, sort of thing. But basically it was a great time. It was not as steamy as I expected it to be. Like there was literally like one steamy scene all the way at the end of the book. Like there was a kiss, and then there was like a very quick not fade to black scene, which really surprised me considering what the cover looked like. So I mean, I still thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I wasn't there for the steam. Like it was such a great book. I didn't even notice it until the end. And then I'm like, wait, then why did we have this cover? So the only thing I actually have to complain about for this book is the weird cover choice. But basically this book was great, and it was one of the best fake dating books I have ever read. So obviously it landed up on this list. And then because I read Not Pretending Anymore and I was starting to work my way down V. Keeland and Penelope Ward's backlog, I came across Bossman by V. Keeland, which I so much loved. I literally read this in just like a couple of hours. I couldn't put it down. It's like a workplace environment sort of thing. Basically, these 2 people, they meet at a restaurant. This girl is on a date with this other guy and she's not having a great time. So she goes to like the back room and starts complaining to her friend, being like, get me out of this date, give me a call in 5 minutes sort of thing. Like, I need to leave. And then this other guy overhears her and is like, you're kind of being a bitch. Like, you know, it's really hard to get a reservation here. Like, you should just try to enjoy your dinner. Like, who do you think you are? And she's like, who do you think you are, butting into somebody else's private conversation? And then she ends up like storming away, going back to her dinner date. And then this guy actually comes over and sits next to her and like pretends that he actually knows her. And like, he makes up this whole story, and she ends up actually having a great night at the end. And then everybody parts ways. And then a month later, they kind of bump bump into each other again, and for whatever circumstances happen, he ends up becoming her new boss. And he's obviously very attracted to her, but she doesn't want to get involved with her boss, and then basically it becomes complicated. So I thought that this was a really fun time. It was pretty classic, like, rich guy, he's the boss, and like, there wasn't anything like too unique about it, but at the same time, I thoroughly enjoyed it and I don't have anything bad to say about it. Next up, I have Meet You in the Middle by Devin Daniels, which was a cover buy for me this year. I was in the store, I saw it, I liked the cover, I brought it home without even reading the synopsis. And then once I read it, I was actually very happy about it because it was an enemies to lovers. So it's basically about this girl and this guy. One is a Republican, one is a Democrat, and they both work for senators in Washington, D.C. And the girl basically needs something from the senator that this guy works for. So she ends up making a meeting with him to try to get to his boss, and they don't really have a very good first impression of each other. And then that's kind of what turns them into enemies. And then they start messing with each other, like at work, because they both work in the same building. And then they kind of somewhat become friends. And then obviously that slowly is going to turn to lovers. So I just thought that this book was paced out really well. Nothing was too like cliche or like, oh, I was gonna guess where it goes. Like, I just thought that it was a fun time the whole time. Like, there were so many fun scenes. I'm almost positive there was a take care of me sick moment, which I love seeing in books. And basically, I just thought that this book was a great enemies to lovers. And it's funny because I'm not really into like political books. I don't really like reading about that. But the fact that one was a Republican and one was a Democrat, and then the way that the story actually went, it wouldn't have been as good if the politicalness wasn't actually in it. So I was blown away by this. I had a great time. I don't really have any complaints for it. I highly recommend it, and I really wish that more people would pick it up because I know that enemies to lovers is such like a hyped up trope, and I really think that this book did it really well. And then for another really good enemies to lovers, I read The Hating Game this year by Sally Thorns. So I read it, I'm pretty sure like around April time. I didn't even know that there was a movie coming out about it at the time. And I loved it. I read it like in one night. I remember like skipping dinner because I just didn't want to put this book down. I flew through it. It's basically about these two people. They work together in the same office and their desks are basically facing each other. And because they don't really get along, like there's a whole bunch of reasons, they basically have this thing that they play, which is like the hating game. They'll do like the copycat game or the staring contest, or they'll just mess with each other, and basically like they very much don't get along. They hate each other. They're enemies. And then all of a sudden there is this job opening that one of them could end up becoming the boss for the other. So they're now basically fighting against each other to get promoted to this new position. And then obviously the story just like starts escalating there, and they'll slowly turn from enemies to lovers. So I loved this book. It was another one that had a take care of me sick moment. I just remember that off the top of my head because I recently watched the movie, which unfortunately I found a little bit disappointing, but it did have that moment in it. So it made me remember that there is a sick moment in this one where the guy takes care of the girl. But basically, I loved this book. Even though I didn't love the movie, I absolutely loved the actual book. And I do think that if you're down to watch the movie, then read the book first because it will make the movie like 1,000 times better in my opinion. And also the book is just, it's better than the movie. And then one more enemies to lovers book that I have to share with you. Well, actually not one more, but another one that is pretty similar to The Hating Game is The Spanish Love Deception by Ellen Armet. So I'm pretty sure this book was actually either awarded the Goodreads Choice Awards or it was just nominated or something, but this book came out this year and it was super hyped up, and I personally totally see the hype. So it's an enemies to lovers workplace environment trope that also has a vacation and a fake dating thing going on. So this girl basically needs to bring home a date to her sister's wedding that is in Spain. She kind of told her family that she was bringing home a boyfriend, but she doesn't have one. So she's in work complaining to her friend about it. And she's basically like, I need to find somebody to bring with me because I don't want to look like a fool. And then this guy overhears her and is like, you could bring me as your fake date. Like, do you have anybody else in the running? And she's like, no, but why would I bring you? Because we don't get along. Because him and her, they are basically enemies in the workplace. They don't like each other. So she doesn't understand why he is offering to come with her. And basically in the first half of the book, you kind of get to see them as they aren't getting along in the workplace environment, and as he is trying to convince her to bring him along to her sister's wedding. And then in the second half of the book, obviously he convinced her and they're going to go off to Spain and go to the wedding and pretend to fake date. And obviously it's going to turn from an enemies to lovers fake dating scenario into an actual relationship sort of thing. So I very much liked this book. There was a one bed trope in this book, which I always love. And anyway, I definitely saw the hype in this book. It was one of my favorites from the year, and I do highly recommend it if everything I just said sounds intriguing to you. Next, I have the Come Back to Me series by Mila Gray. So I'm holding up book 1, but this is actually a companion series of 5 books. And for this top video of the year, I wanted to specifically mention the first 3 books, and I probably should have just grabbed all 3 of them, but my mistake, and I'm not getting up now. But my point is that Come Back to Me is the first book, and this is a brother's best friends trope, and the whole series in general is like a military-based romance. One of the guys are always in the military, and then there's a girl that comes in and she has a relationship with him. Like either, he's currently in the military, or he's out on leave, or he just like finished the military, something along those lines. And basically in the first book, it's the brother and the brother's best friend are both home on leave, and basically when he comes home, they both find out that they have liked each other for a while, and then they end up having a romance together. And there are some trigger warnings that you should definitely look up for this series in general, but basically there is some hard-hitting things that happen throughout all of these books, and I don't really want to say what it is, so look it up yourself because, I don't want to spoil anything. But my point is that this is one of my favorite books from the year, as well as like one of my favorite series in general, because I loved the whole entire series, except specifically the first 3 books were my favorite out of all 5. So Come Back to Me, Brother's Best Friend, and then book 2 was a grumpy sunshine trope. This guy basically recently got injured, and he basically is in this like rehabilitation center, and he doesn't want to talk to anybody, and then this girl comes in and she's interning there, and basically she gets him to open up and they're gonna have a relationship. So that one is Stay With Me, and then book 3 is Run Away With Me. And a little bit confusing, but I don't understand how book 3 fits into this 5-book series, because all of them are military-based romances besides for this one, and they all have a very minimal overlap of like characters besides for book 3, which is Run Away With Me. So in this book, it's actually a hockey romance. These 2 people were best friends since they were children, and basically they were both on the hockey team together. Nobody could pull them apart. And then something happens, and this guy basically moves away and doesn't really say goodbye to her or anything, and she's very hurt. And now they're both grown up. It's like 10 years later or so, and he comes back into town trying to get her to forgive him, and he wants to get to know her again. And she's like, stay away from me, you ruined my childhood, I don't want to see you ever again. And obviously he's not going to leave. He's going to bug her until she talks to him, and then you're going to get to see their relationship happen again. So book 3 is actually a little bit of a dual timeline, and you're slowly finding out what happened all the way back then that made him leave all of a sudden. And then, you're going to get to the end, you're going to find out what it was. And at the same time, you're watching the relationship blossom again in the future. And it's a really good time. I seriously am not sure which book to pick from all 3 of the ones I just mentioned, but basically all 3 of them are my favorites. So I'm bundling them all together as, another top for this year. Next, I have Enemies by Tajan, which is an enemies to lovers sports romance. So you're basically following this girl who ends up moving out of state for college. She wanted to go to like this specific program that was only available in this college. So she goes all the way there, even though she knows literally nobody, except for this guy who happens to be on a pro football team in the same state that she's in, because they both grew up together and they used to be best friends. And then once puberty hit, for some reason, he all of a sudden like started to hate her, and now they're basically enemies. They haven't talked in like a handful of years. And now that their parents both know that they are both in the same state, really close to each other, they give them their numbers, and they're like, you should really call her, you should really call him, you should get to know each other again, because you know nobody else where you are, you're all alone there. And they're basically both like, no, I hate her, I hate him, we're not talking. And then happens to be something actually happens in the girl's life, and nobody can get a hold of her. So he kind of takes it upon himself to go and tell her the news, and then the story kind of goes off from there. I don't really want to say anything more, but basically it was just amazing and so much better than I expected. I literally picked this book up on a whim. I saw one person mention it on an Instagram post of like a stack of sports romances, and I was very into reading sports romances this year. Like I'm constantly looking for more good ones. So if you have any recommendations for me, please leave it down in the comment section below. But basically, I totally read this book on a whim, and I was so pleasantly surprised that hopefully in 2022, I'm actually going to start checking out more work by Dijon because I was a huge fan of this book by her. Next, I have the Off Campus series by Elle Kennedy. So I'm holding up book 1, and it is a 4-book companion series where you're following these 4 guys that are all on the same hockey team, and they basically share a house off campus, and they each get their own romance, and it's basically like a college hockey romance sort of thing. They're all in college, they're doing college things, and for whatever reason they have a romance. And book 1 is like a fake dating, book 2 is just like a random hookup turns into a relationship, book 3 is like, you know, they had a one-night stand and it happens to be their best friends are best friends and they weren't supposed to sleep with each other, so then, you know, they end up having to hide it and stuff like that. And then book 4 was an accidental pregnancy. So happens to be from the original Off-Campus series, book 1 and book 3 were my favorite, but I'm bundling it together as just like, I'm a huge fan of Off-Campus in general. But if you were curious, book 1 and book 3 were my favorite from Off-Campus. And then the Briar U series, which is the spin-off series from Off-Campus, my favorite was book 1 and book 2. So book 1 was a brother's best friend. I'm pretty sure it was called The Chase. And then book 2 was a forbidden romance. It was like a hockey guy that's on a different team has a relationship with the Briar U coach's daughter. And it was just really good. That was one of my favorites also from the entire series. I'm pretty sure book 2 from Briar U and then book 1, which is The Deal from Off Campus, were my top 2 from all 8 books. And then I don't even remember what book 3 and book 4 was from the Briar U series, but basically I didn't really like them. So that was a lot of information, super confusing because I didn't hold up all the books. But my point is that I'm a huge fan of Off Campus. I read all 8 books this year, and in general, it did make it to my top favorites from 2021. Next, I have The Wall of Winnipeg by Mariana Zapata. So this is a football romance. You're basically following this girl who works for this pro football player, and she's worked for him for like 2 years, but she absolutely hates her job because he's like a grump. He's really hard to work for. Like, she's his personal assistant. She does like everything for him sort of thing. And anyway, she finally saved up enough money and she wants to go and start her own graphic design business. So she finally quits and goes on her merry way. And then like a month later, this guy basically shows up at her door and is like, I can't live without you. Please come back. I need you. And then the story kind of takes off from there. So that's kind of the information that you get from the back of the book. But honestly, the back of the book doesn't have a lot of information on it. And this story took a turn that I personally didn't see coming, but I ended up loving so much more than I expected to. Like, I went into this book not really knowing, and then I was like blown away, really enjoyed the book. So I like this one a lot more than All Roads Lead Here, which I also read this year. So if you saw my almost favorite list from yesterday, then you know that All Roads Lead Here was on that list because it was really good, but it didn't make my top tier, especially because I read this book and then I also read Culty by Mariana Zapata, which I absolutely loved as well. So I actually enjoyed Culty just a little bit more than The Wall of Winnipeg, but both of these were absolutely amazing and they both made it onto my top list of the year because they were that great. So Culty I just enjoyed a little bit more because it was a soccer romance between a coach and then, you know, a pro player. So the pro player basically became a pro because she always looked up to this guy growing up. Like, he was a pro player and, you know, she just very much like envied him or whatever you want to call it. Like, she looked up to him. And basically she is now a pro player herself, and her team got a new coach for the season who happens to be this guy that she looked up to her whole life. And then once she meets him in person, she realizes that she actually doesn't really like him because he's a bit of a grump and people just don't like getting near him because he's not fun to be around. And, you know, the story's going to go from there. They're basically going to become like somewhat of friends, and it's going to turn into a romance. And the reason why I loved this book the most out of all of the other Mariana Zapata books that I read this year was because this one, the 2 main characters interacted a lot. So even though it was a very slow burn, like literally like Mariana Zapata makes you wait like just a little bit too long, even though she makes it worth it by the time you get to the end. But in this book specifically, we saw a lot of interactions between both characters, and therefore it kept me going. Like, I got to see so much buildup of their friendship turning into actual feelings feelings and stuff like that, versus the other books, it was kind of like slower. Like there were a lot of moments where the characters were like by themselves and like they weren't really interacting as much with the other main character, like the love interest and stuff. So my reasoning for liking Culty the most was because of that. And I am hoping to read more of her work in 2022. I actually already own From Luke Love with Love and Underlock. So those are going to be the next two books that I read by her. And I am just hoping to enjoy them as much as I enjoyed The Wall of Winnipeg and Culty. And then I also have the Brutal Birthright series by Sophie Lark. So I'm holding up book one, which is Brutal Prince. And at this very moment, I have officially read only the first 3 books in this series, but I'm kind of trying to take it really slow because I kind of don't want it to be over. Like they're all so freaking good that I don't want to fly through it because then all of a sudden I'm not going to have anything left to read by her. So I've only read the first 3 books so far, but I am obsessed. I love Sophie Lark's writing. There's just something about her that it's so easy to read. Like I just fly through it. Like I have no complaints. I think that she writes really good characters. Like one thing about her is that her characters, like the girl character, is always like a strong female. And then even though she does a lot of like alpha males and stuff like that, like this is a mafia romance companion series. So obviously the guys are like very strong-willed and very like you're mine possessive sort of stuff and like very intense. The girl matches up with him just as much. So it makes for a very interesting sort of romance because for the most part, like all of the characters are always like butting heads in the best way possible. And I am just a huge fan. So book 1 was an arranged marriage. Book 2 was a kidnapping romance / a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And then book 3 was just like a regular romance. Like the two people, they knew each other from high school and then they were never really close or anything like that. And then they bumped into each other when they're older and then they have a romance. So I don't know. I loved book 3. I know that book 4 is a second chance romance. So hopefully I'll be reading that soon. But basically, Sophie Lark, I absolutely love. And honestly, we're about to get into my top 5 favorites. And if I would have made a top 6, this would have been the 6th one. But there were just some more books that I read this year that I had to put on top of this. But seriously, I loved this so much that it definitely deserves like an extra little notch of I very, very much loved it. And now for my top 5 favorites from this year. So coming in at number 5 is the Sinner of Saints series by L.J. Shen. So I'm holding up book 1, which is Vicious. But book 2 is Ruckus, book 3 is Scandalous, and book 4 is Bane. And all 4 of these books were in my top favorites. Like I'm not just holding up book 1 because it was my favorite. Like I'm just too lazy to get all 4 down from my shelves. But basically book 1, Vicious, is a bully romance. Book 2 was a second chance romance. Book 3 is an age gap forbidden romance. And then book 4 was just like, I don't know, it was on a whole other level. But basically I loved the entire series. They're all companion books. They're very steamy. They're very dark, a little bit more on the like next level intense side. Like, you know, all the topics are a little bit, you know, they're not as cute rom-commy, like a bully romance, an age gap forbidden. Like they're all just, you know, hit up a level from some of the other stuff that I was reading at this time. Like this was one of my first dark romances that I read, if they would even be considered a dark romance. I don't know, but it was definitely steamy. And basically, I absolutely loved it. I flew through these books. I wasn't really sure what I was getting myself involved in. And then I was blown away. Like all 4 of the guys in all 4 books, they're all really good friends. They own a company together. They're all like billionaires, millionaires sort of thing. And it's got that vibe going on. And then the girl comes in and each of them, they get their own story and it was just great. I'm not going to go in and explain, you know, what each book is about. All I'm going to say is that it was one of my top favorites from this year. So I obviously just highly recommend it. And coming in at number 4 is the Sinner's Duet by Sophie Lark. So it's There Are No Saints, and then the second book, which is There Is No Devil. And oh my God, was I blown away by this book. So this is a serial killer romance. It's the first serial killer romance I ever read. And it was definitely dark and twisted and not what I expected, but in the best way possible. Honestly, I didn't really know what to expect. So I kind of went into it blind, knowing that there were going to be some crazy things happening. I just wasn't really sure how it was all going to play out. And I just loved it. You're basically following this guy who is a serial killer and also a very famous artist. And he lives in San Diego and happens to be there is another serial killer in town who also happens to be an artist, and they're always rivaling against each other. And, you know, basically they both kill people. And this girl is a struggling artist, the girl that you're following in the story. And basically the other serial killer takes her as his target and basically goes and kills her. And the thing is that she doesn't die, and she basically gets on the radar of the guy that we're following. His name is Cole, who is a serial killer. And basically he ends up getting crazy obsessed with her. He ends up stalking her, being, very scary about it, and it was just a really fun time. So they're gonna end up having a romance, and it was just dark and twisted and crazy, and I loved it. My third favorite from this year is the Maid series by Danielle Laurie. So I'm holding up the first book from the series. It is The Sweetest Oblivion. Book 2 is The Maddest Obsession, and then book 3 is The Darkest Temptation. And they are all mafia companion series. And there is a fourth book coming out in this series sometime in 2022, but I don't know when or what it's called or anything like that. But basically, I love this series so far. So it was my first mafia romance that I ever read. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I've heard about mafia romances in general, but I didn't really know what to expect. And then I was blown away. I thoroughly enjoyed the entire series. Book 1 is an arranged marriage. Book 2 is kind of a second chance. It was never the right time. I've always kind of stalked you, and now it's our time sort of romance. And then book 3 is a kidnapping Stockholm Syndrome romance. So happens to be my favorite of the first 3 from the series is number 1 and number 3, the arranged marriage, and then, the kidnapping romance. I loved those books. Book 2, I didn't really connect with so much because I didn't like the main character. We originally met her in book 1, and I didn't like her in this book. And then I didn't really like her anymore when all of a sudden I read her story. And there was a little bit of timeline jumps in that one. And I didn't love the pacing of it so much, but it was still pretty solid and it had really good steam. I liked the guy in the book. I just didn't like the girl very much. But book 1 and book 3, I seriously have no complaints. It was absolutely amazing, obviously, because it is my top 3 favorite from the year. And basically, I am just really excited to read book 4 sometime in 2022, whenever it comes out. And my second favorite book, well, actually this is a series from this year, is the Ravenhood series by Kate Stewart. So I'm holding up book 1, which is Flock. Book 2 is Exodus. Book 3 is The Finish Line. And you're basically following one storyline throughout all 3 books. I actually did a reading vlog on this book, and I'm going to have a link down below in case you are curious, a little bit more in detail about what this is about and how I reacted as I read it. But basically, this book and this series tore out my heart, and then tried to stitch it back together as much as possible, but honestly, it's still a little bit broken. Anytime I think about this series, or I'm online and I just see an aesthetic reel or a clip about it or a quote or anything, all of a sudden I just go back to the moment that I read it and my heart breaks all over again. This series is one of a kind. I have never read anything like it, and I don't think I'll ever read anything like this again. It was crazy and amazing and so good in so many ways. I can't even begin to explain what it's actually about, because the entire story, you are meant to be confused because the main girl doesn't even know what's going on. You're basically following this girl, and she basically wants to get her inheritance. Her father owns this Fortune 500 company, and she's not very close with him. And he basically said, if you want your inheritance, you have to come and work for me for the year. So the story starts out where she goes to where her father lives in this small town, and she starts working at his factory. And then right when she gets there, she meets this guy, and she ends up going home with him because he's having a party at his house. And then she meets his friends, and then, basically the story is going to go from there. And she's going to find out that this guy is kind of the guy that you're supposed to stay away from. Everybody keeps warning her, stay away from that crowd, stay away from that guy. They're not good, people to be around. And obviously she doesn't listen, and she's going to end up having, a romance, and it's going to go crazy. And basically you're always going to be confused as to what these guys are all about, because, they have this motorcycle gang-ish sort of thing going on. They own a mechanic shop, and basically there's a lot of mystery surrounding them. And throughout all 3 books, you slowly find out what they are actually about and what's going on. It's just crazy to unravel the whole story. And, once you get to the end, you go back to the beginning, you're like, oh my God, I see it all. But then when you were reading it for the first time, all of a sudden you're like, I am so confused. What the hell is going on? And it was a great time for so many reasons. The romances in this, the twists and the turns and everything about it. I have no words. Oh my God, I just loved it. And now for my favorite read from 2021. It's crazy because I almost wasn't going to read this book. I literally passed on it all year. I kept seeing it over and over and I'm like, I don't know if I really want to get involved. It seems like a bit of a commitment and I'm not sure if I'm going to like it. And therefore I kept passing on it. And then for some reason, I'm like, forget about it. Let's just go for it. See what it's actually about. Basically, that series is the Addicted / Callaway Sisters series by Krista and Becca Ritchie. Oh my God, am I obsessed. I'm pretty sure this is my new favorite series of all time. I can't even begin to explain how crazy in love I am with all of these characters from these books. We followed 10 books, 3 different romances, 6 different characters, and I can't even begin to explain my love for this series. And I'm actually not going to because I have a couple of videos out from this series. If you are confused about this series, you don't really know much about it, but you want to know more, I have a how to read the Addicted / Callaway Sisters series video where I basically talked about what this series is actually about, how to read them, all of the questions that you might have. So I'm going to have that linked in the description below, as well as all of the vlogs that I did for all 10 books in this series. Throughout the entire month of December, on every Friday, I put out another vlog where I read a couple of books from this series, and it happens to be on the last day of December. My last vlog is going to be coming out. So I have a playlist for all of that. So if you are interested in watching those, again, they'll be in the description below. But basically, this is my new favorite series of all time. Not even my new favorite series of this year, even though it is, but it is my new all-time favorite series. I don't think I'm ever going to read something more amazing than this. We followed 6 characters, 3 romances throughout the course of 10 or 17 years. Honestly, I forgot off the top of my head, but it was crazy. I've never read something where the characters felt so real. Every time I read a book, the characters, they feel real to me. I really get deep into their head and I feel like they're real people. And then I feel like that is a joke compared to the Addicted / Callaway Sisters series. These are actually real people. They live somewhere in Philadelphia living their lives and people just wrote a book about them. That is how real they feel to me. And I love every single one of them so much. There are books that I like more or less, in this series, but for the most part, all 10 books are absolutely amazing. Seriously, could not praise them anymore. I freaking love them. And yeah, I just recommend you watch all the videos that I put out, about how to read the series if you aren't so familiar with it. And then all of my vlogs if you are familiar with it and you want to know my actual thoughts on each and every one of these books. But basically, that is it. That is my favorite books from 2021. I know there were a lot. I know that I probably should have narrowed it down a bit, but I really do think that all of the books that I mentioned in this video deserved the praise that I gave them. So I'm curious to know if you've read any of these books. What did you think about them? Did they make them to your top favorites of the year? Or let me know what your top favorite books from this year was, because I'm always looking for good recommendations and I'd love to know what you enjoyed reading this year. But anyway, if you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. And anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are enjoying Bookmas. I am kind of sad that it is almost over. But anyway, until next time, enjoy reading.